Hi, today we're going to talk about the homework for Chapter 6, Section C. This is the 3 variable truth tables. I hope you've already watched the lecture on the actual chapter. That gives you some background and some information that you're going to need to know in order to get to those particular pieces. I hope you've also already read the book in those pages, 209 to 212, so that you have kind of, again, some background, some things running around in your head already. If you haven't, go back and do that, and then come back to this. But anyway, I'm going to walk through a few things today about how we're using these truth tables and how to make them, basically. Hopefully this is going to be good enough on your screen that you can kind of zoom in and that kind of stuff. I'm doing my best here. These videos are a little bit more technical than what I am capable of doing, so I'm doing my best. You can always text or email or come by the office and ask questions. I'd be more than happy to help. So here we go. This part here, well, here's a little agenda. I'm going to do 2 problems with you today and kind of call it a day. And then there's another video coming on the remix worksheet, a little bit more stuff. So anyway, we know our little mantra from Chapter 6 is it's impossible for a valid argument to have all true premises but a false conclusion. Okay? And if that doesn't quite sit well in your head, there's a corollary. Okay, there's another way of looking at it. And here's my kind of reword. If any argument, we get to the very end of our truth table, if any argument has a false conclusion, okay, and so we're only ever really concerned about a false conclusion. True conclusions, it's all good. False conclusions we have to look at. So if an argument has a false conclusion, as long as that false conclusion has at least one false premise, my argument is still valid. Okay? Now, if your argument has 5 false conclusions or 8 false conclusions, you have to look at each one individually and make sure that each of those false conclusions has at least one false premise, and it's still a valid argument. Okay? And that gets back here, the impossible part. If it's possible for your argument to have all true premises but a false conclusion, then it's invalid. Okay, so however that makes sense to you, great, use that. Okay, they both mean the same thing, they're just coming out different ways. Okay, so in 6.8, you have a series of questions you have to answer for homework. And I really only gave you one example of a 3 variable truth table in the notes for Chapter 6C. So I want to give you a couple more, and I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of the ones that I've assigned this semester anyway as homework. Now, if you're looking at this further semesters, it might not be the same numbers, but it's the same principle. Okay, so we'll go from there. I'm looking on page 216 at number 7. Now, this is also one that Dr. Vaughn has done in the back of the book. Okay, so you have backup if you're looking at things. In my version of the book, there's a typo. There's a T where there should be an F, but we're going to get to that. Okay, so here's my write-up. Okay, 6.8 number 7 says, if P then Q, that's premise 1. Premise 2, not Q and R. Conclusion, therefore Q. And that's what these little triangle-looking 3 dots mean. He never tells you that. He just uses them and moves on. It's okay. So if I'm looking at this particular argument, I have to look at each of my lines here to see how many symbols I have in each line. If I just have one, I don't have to do anything extra. But in this second line, I have 2 symbols. I have a not and I have an and. And when I get to my premise, I really only want to have to do one thing. Okay? So if I have to do 2 things, I want to kind of parse that out, take that apart, simplify it, so that I can do that in my guide area, not in my argument area, and still only have to do one thing at the end. Okay, now, you may be able to hold all this in your head at the same time. Woohoo, yay for you. I can't, okay, I still can't. So I write everything out. If you're averse to writing things out, that's the other part. Just make sure I know what you're doing. Make sure your therefore is above your Q, and we're all happiness. For the rest of us, here's the deal. I know I have to go through and put my P and my Q and my R. Everybody has to have those 3 for their guide. Now, those of us who need to write things out more diligently, more precisely, whatever, more detailed, we're going to add a not Q. Okay, that not part is really easy to take care of over here, so I don't have to hold not Q in my head when I get to my actual premise. Okay, that's my guide. Then each of my pieces of my argument, each premise and my conclusion gets its own column, okay, for figuring out in the truth table. So my next column is if P then Q. The next column, not Q and R. And the last column is therefore Q, okay? Now, you could just use this guy over here. And if you're doing that, make sure in your homework you're putting the therefore above it so I know that's what you're doing. You're not just leaving off the end, okay? Make it easy for the teacher to grade and put your points. So, I know, and you know, I have 3 variables, so I need 8 rows, okay? So I'm going to use my half and half rule, and I'm going to set it up so that it looks the same way my 3 variables always look. That way I don't have to think about it too much. Okay, but this is how I do it. Half and half rule. I have 8 rows, so half of 8 is 4. So I do 4 trues. And then I still have 4 lines left, so I do 4 falses. Now on the board here, I'm going to do this so I have a chance of keeping at least that many together. The second thing I do is I take half of my 4, and that's 2. So I'm doing things 2 by 2 in my second column. 2 trues, 2 falses, and then I repeat it again because I still have space to fill up. Okay, so my second variable, whether it's a Q or a J or whatever, always looks like that. Okay, now you'll notice I have 2 sets of my regular length piece here. Well, that's because I have another variable to go, and it's going to be the one that decides and turns everything into unique rows. So half of 2 is 1, so I'm going 1 by 1, and I'm just going to keep going 1 by 1 until I get to the bottom. Okay, so my P is 4 trues and then 4 falses. My Q, 2 trues, 2 falses, 2 trues, 2 falses. Okay, and my R is true, false, all the way down until I end up with 8 rows. Okay, every time I do this, it should look like this. Okay, 2 different reasons. One is these are all of the possibilities for my truth table. The possibilities for these 3 variables to work together, these are the only combinations they can be in. And it's all of them, and each of them is different. Okay, I have 3 falses, 2 falses and a true, the true in the middle, a false and 2 trues. Every single line is different, and those are all the possibilities for these 3 to be in combination. Now from here, I'm going to use a series of relationships, and if you did this back in 6A, you made your little card, okay? These are all the combinations you need, right? You don't have to have anything else. We're just going to use them more often when we have the 8. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple things here. When I'm looking at not Q here, I have to make sure I'm looking at my Q column. This is where I make mistakes, okay? It's a not Q, but I used the wrong column to do that from. It's going to change my truth table. Okay, if that's the kind of mistake you're making, that's not a huge deal. That's basically a typo, okay? The understanding's there. It's, you know, the copying skills are a little bit different. So when I get to not Q, I'm going to look back here at my Q column. I'm going to ignore the other 2. And every place Q is true, not Q is false. So I have 2 trues. So not Q has 2 falses. I have 2 falses. Not Q has 2 trues. And the same thing on the bottom. So wherever I am here, this one is opposite day. Okay? I just have to be careful that I'm looking at the right row. The right column. The next piece, I'm looking for this relationship, the conditional relationship from P to Q. And so I'm going to use my first 2 columns, and I always write myself a little note because we know in the conditional it matters which variable is first and which is second. Okay, with our other types of connections it doesn't matter, but with the conditional it does. So this one We're in the right order already. It goes from P to Q. I'm looking for the ones that go from true to false, because the true, if true then false, is my only false answer in my whole truth table for the conditional. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm kind of my odd man out. So I'm looking at here, if true then true is true, true to true is true. Here's my first false. From if true then false is false. If true then false is false. If false then true is true, and again. If false then false is true, and again. So my two truths, my two falses end up here in the middle, okay? And remember, we're always looking across the row. It starts getting more complicated, not because it's harder, but because we've got all this stuff in the middle that we have to ignore. So tracking problems, I have a few of those. Tracking problems can give us issues here. But again, if that's the kind of mistake you're making, then I'm not too worried, right? It's just a matter of making sure we've got the right piece in the right column, which is, as you know, harder than it sounds. My next column, my not Q and R, I'm going to look at these two, okay? Now, for my conjunction, my and, it doesn't matter which particular order it's in, because really the only time I have a true is when they're both true, right? When both my variables are true. So I'm looking, and I still usually write myself a little note, this is an and. So true and false is still going to be false. Two falses, false. Two trues, there's my only combination that works as a true. As long as I have one false, I have a false answer. Here's my other true. Okay? So I have a true here, and I have a true here. False, false, true, false. False, false, true, false. And that's going to be important for us when we're looking at the conjunctions. Always only look for the true and true. Now, this last one is the easiest piece. It's the same Q that I have over here. I just have to, again, make sure I'm copying the right column, right? Because anytime I say if Q is true on my first line, then it has to be true on every first line. I can't change my mind, okay? So here's my Q. It's my 2 by 2. So true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false, okay? So that gives me my whole truth table. I'm done. Now I can work with it. I have to check all of my false pieces here. I thought that was true. Yep, okay. As long as I have one false premise with my false conclusion, it's still valid. Okay, so I just go through and I circle them. Mostly I'm doing this on the board so that you can see that my line actually does kind of line up. It doesn't really do that very well. So here, first one, I have a false premise over there, so he's okay. Two false premises, he's really okay. Then I get down here and I have a false conclusion, but both of my premises are true. So this is an invalid argument. Okay? I thought this was valid when I did it earlier, so let me check and make sure I got this right. Not Q and R. False. True and true. False and true. Yep, invalid. Da, 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 da. If I did everything else right, it's invalid. So, if I made a mistake, send me an email, let me know. I hate to know, though, in some ways, because this is a video and I don't like to make these things. Anyway, here's your 6.8, number 7. Okay. I'm also going to walk through 6.9, number 1. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. You have plenty of time to get it because you can always just pause. I'm used to asking my seated folks, everybody has this that needs it. here. If you don't, rewind. Okay. What am I doing here? Okay. So if I'm looking at 6.9, number 1, this is a word problem, right? So it says, if there is no rain soon, the crops will die. If the crops die, there will be no food for the coming winter. The crops will not die. Therefore, there will be rain soon. What I do for mine, because I own my book, is I write all over it. Okay, you can't necessarily do that if you are renting your book, but you can use pencil. Okay, remember the first statement we get to is always our P. The next one that's different is our Q. If there's a next one that's different, that's our R. Okay, and we're only ever going to get 3. Dr. Vaughn nor I will ever give you anything that's got 4 or 5 or 6. Okay, so if you come up with 6, try again. Okay, so if there's rain soon, the crops will die. So my P is, it will rain soon. Okay, my Q, crops will die. My R, there will be food. Okay, those are my 3 pieces. Make sure that your plain variables, your P, your Q, your R, just like that, don't have any knots in them. Okay? If there's a knot, then put the tilde in front. It's a not R. Okay? So the next thing I do then is I go through and I circle my connector words, if, thens, ands, ors, and my knots. And then I put like a double line underneath my therefore or my so I know where it is. So this time I have, if there is no rain soon, the crops will die. There's a period. End of premise. In this case, anyway. If the crops die, there will be no food for the coming winter. Another if-then. The crops will not die. There's no connector in that sentence. So that particular sentence, that particular premise is just a variable. It can be done. Therefore, there will be rain soon. Again, no connector, just a variable. Okay? So here's how this one comes out. If there is no rain soon, I can do that there, not P, then the crops will die. That's Q. If the crops die, Q, then there will be no food for the coming winter, so not R. The crops will not die, so that's not Q. Therefore, our nice little 3 dots, there will be rain soon, therefore P. Okay, so that's my argument. Now, I know this is a pretty easy explanation. When we get some interesting vocabulary or it goes on for a while, sometimes it's harder to see, but we'll be okay. Okay, so here's my argument, not P, then Q. If Q, then not R. Not Q, therefore P. Okay? It's not a simple, it's not a modus ponens, it's not a hypothetical, it's not any of those guys. So I have to really do the work and make sure that I have a valid argument here. I know here and here, I have two symbols in each of those lines. Well, it's an easy fix for me because both of these are knots. Okay? So I'm going to do a not P and a not R in my guide. And I think I'm going to do that up here so I have a little extra space. Okay, so I'm going to do my normal PQR. And then I'm going to do a not P and a not R. And that's my whole guide. And then each one of these lines gets its own column in my truth table. Okay, barely have enough room to actually work this on the board. Okay, so that's my top line. So check your line against this one. And then I have 3 variables, so I know it's 8 rows. So I do my 4 by 4. And then 2 by 2. And then 1 by 1. And I'm going to do my little line here so I can kind of keep track. Okay? So there's my normal setup. Now I have, I only brought 4 colors with me, so this might be interesting. My knot P, I have to start with my 4x4 and flip it. Okay, so every place there's a true P, there's a false knot P. Every place there's a false P, there's a true knot P. Same thing for my R. Okay, it's my 1x1, so I'm going to go false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true. Now I have everything I need to get through my other side here. Okay. Now I'm doing if not P, then Q. Okay, so I'm looking at if not P, then not Q. Okay, so that's how that one works. I'm going to start with the not P because that's the first variable in my relationship over there, and I'm going to go to my Q. So I have to be careful. This is where I tend to make mistakes. Okay, so I'm going false to true is true, false to true is true, false to false is true, false to false is true, true to true is true, true to true, true, true to false is false, true to false is false. Okay, so relatively painless this time. The next one, Q to not R, if Q, then not R. I'm still going to use my Q, okay, but now I have to use the not R column. So I'm basically skipping the 2 in the middle, which is harder than it sounds, at least it is to me. But at least I'm going the right direction, okay? I'm taking this one and going to this one. So I'm going to try to, I have almost enough time to do that with. So true to false is false, true to true, true, false to false, true, false to true, true, true to false is false, true to true is true, false to false is false, false to true. Oops, sorry, false to false is true. Fix that. False to true is also true. Okay, so I'm only getting a false when I have true first. My Q is true, and in this case, my not R is false. So that first one in each set. False, true, 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 false, true, true, true. Okay? Now these last 2 are pretty easy. My not Q is opposite day for this one, right? I don't have him over here yet. So it's my 2x2. Any place Q is true, not Q is false. True, true, false, false. So false, false, true, true. Okay? Trying to be consistent with my colors here. Not always. P is my first row here, my first column here, so I have to make sure it's the same die over here. So it's 4 trues on the top, and then 4 falses on the bottom. Okay? So not so horrible, right? I'm done. It's not too bad. I have to look at all 4 of these bottom pieces, right? So I'm looking at that one, that one, that one. Okay. Now, most of the arguments we've done so far have only had 2 premises. This one has 3, which is where that all up here comes into play. Make sure that you're not going past your little guideline here, but you are going up to it. Okay, just because we have 3 or 4 or 5 premises doesn't mean we can stop with the first 2. You need to look at all of them, right? All true premises. So my false conclusion here has at least 1 false premise. That one too, that one too, and that one. Okay, so this is a valid argument, and we're happiness. Well, you know, as happy as we can be with truth tables. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps you get your homework off to a good start. Do what you can with the rest. Again, your job is to make your best stab. If you get to the point where you're frustrated and you can't figure out what you're doing wrong, put it away for a little bit. Come back, pick it up again. Just make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to work on this. Be patient. It does take some practice, But it is pretty much, it's done or it's not done. It's on homework kind of stuff. So let me know if I can be of any more help. I'm going to give you another video on the remix worksheet. So come back and look at that when you're done with this stuff. So happy day. And my computer's being silly, so I've got to cancel that. There we go.